It's thought Le Roux had over $100 million in shoeboxes lining the walls of his apartment in Manila.
Everything is sweet. Everything is sweet.
It is.
Whatever happened to the guy?
Paul Le Roux is different from the Mexican drug lord, the Colombian drug lord. He aspired to be like the Jeff Bezos of the arms and the underworld.
In a time of chaos and change, an interesting story is in order. Paul Le Roux is a fascinating character whose story entails drugs, gold, arms dealing, North Koreans, Iranians, elite level encryption, Somali pirates, women, and more women. Let's get into it. Paul Le Roux was born on Christmas Eve 1972 in Bulawayo, the second largest city of what was then called, by the white minority that governed it at least, Rhodesia. In 1980, Robert Mugabe became Prime Minister of what would now be called Zimbabwe, ending minority white rule in the country. 4 years later, when Le Roux was 12, his family relocated to South Africa. Not long after the move, in exchange for washing his father's car, Le Roux was given his first computer. After that, a relation of Le Roux states that he became completely antisocial. When Le Roux was 15 or 16 in the late 1980s, the local police raided the family home and arrested Paul for selling pornography. After that, Le Roux turned even more inward. Although he was an excellent student, he despised the idea of learning Afrikaans, which was compulsory in South African schools, describing it as a dead language that he didn't want to learn. At 16, Le Roux dropped out of high school and decided to follow up his interest in computers, taking a local programming course. Family law has it that after he spent one class explaining some technical fact to the teacher, he got a letter saying he no longer needed to attend. He then completed a year's worth of material in just 8 weeks, and accounts of Le Roux do indicate that he was exceptionally gifted.
The impression the investigators have had is that he is off the chart smart. People who've worked with him thought he was a genius.
After returning from a family holiday in Disneyland in the US, Le Roux decided to leave home and left for the UK just 8 months later to work as a programmer. He then moved from the UK to the US, where he lived in Virginia Beach. After 6 months in the US, he followed his then girlfriend Michelle to Australia in 1995. The couple married and Le Roux acquired Australian citizenship. Le Roux frequented message boards and enjoyed troweling Australians. A typical post read, "All of Australia could disappear into the Pacific and the only difference it would make to the world is the Americans would have one less pussy country to protect." His post caused outrage on the board. Someone even changed their handle to fuck@you.paul. Le Roux would later declare that his correspondence had fallen for his ploy. Australians are easy to provoke, and your postings, including 2 death threats, numerous flames, and one guy who swears he has my address and phone number, have provided me with hours of amusement. Of course, Le Roux did more than just troll Australians during this period. He started working on E4M, Encryption for the Masses, in 1997, and released it at the end of 1998. E4M allowed users to encrypt entire hard drives and to conceal the existence of encrypted files, such that prying eyes wouldn't even know they were there. According to Le Roux, the software was written from scratch, with thousands of hours going into its development and testing. As well as this, in the politics section of the E4M website, Le Roux published a sort of manifesto describing how governments are increasingly relying on electronic data gathering, and how strong encryption is the mechanism with which to combat these intrusions, preserve your rights, and guarantee your freedoms in the information age and beyond. In the spirit of the open source software movement in the late 90s, Le Roux released E4M for free and made the code available for other people to improve. Therefore, with no income from his 2 years of labour, Le Roux was struggling financially, and as well as this, his marriage fell apart violently and the couple divorced in 1999. Le Roux first relocated to Hong Kong, then to Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He married a Dutch citizen named Lillian, and they had a child shortly after.
Lord Rothschild, thank you for gracing us with your presence today. Have you liked the video and subscribed to the channel?
Yes.
And your children?
Well, that's a highly personal question.
Yeah.
But, you know, I've got a wonderful daughter who's deeply interested in it, Hannah.
Yeah.
2 other daughters, a son.
Indeed.
A foundation which
Yes.
has become much
Yes,
bigger in
indeed.
the last
Yeah.
20 years. So it'll be well looked after.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
In 2000, in an attempt to monetize his expertise in E4M, Le Roux launched SW Professionals. Based in South Africa, the company offered offshore programming, including E4M customization. One of Le Roux's clients was an Italian telecoms engineer called Wilfred Hafner, who had corresponded with Le Roux for several years about E4M. Hafner had founded a company to create a commercial encryption product that would combine some of the elements of E4M with another piece of software, ScramDisk. The new company would be called Secure Star, and its product would be called TrueCrypt. Hafner hired Le Roux to build TrueCrypt's underlying engine. At the time, Le Roux was desperate for money. He drove a beat-up car and he worked out of a Rotterdam apartment so small that on the phone, Hafner could hear a crying baby in the background. Hafner, on the other hand, was living in the south of France, and Le Roux openly coveted the kind of success that he imagined led to such a home. He told Hafner, "I am ambitious, I want to have all of this." However, in the middle of the development work for TrueCrypt, Hafner discovered that Le Roux was still working on E4M, and was incorporating some of his work for Secure Star into his own personal product. As a result, Hafner terminated Le Roux's contract. By October 2002, SW Professionals was now defunct, and Le Roux was openly soliciting for work on the alt.security.scramdisk forum. It was around this time that Le Roux received some news that shattered his whole world. In 2002, he travelled to Zimbabwe to retrieve a copy of his birth certificate. On the trip, his aunt and uncle pulled him aside to tell him the truth, and it was then that Le Roux found out that he was adopted. Although many family members had known for years, Le Roux's parents had elected to keep him in the dark about it. It was the unknown part that hurt him the most. Shortly after Le Roux appeared on another set of message boards, he seemed to be launching some kind of money-making scheme that required opening a company based in the US. In 2004, a group of anonymous developers did exactly what Hafner had feared. They released a new and powerful free file encryption program called TrueCrypt, built on the code for E4M. TrueCrypt combines security and convenience, giving users the ability to strongly encrypt files or entire disk drives, while continuing to work with those files as they would a regular file on their computer. Hafner and his colleagues suspected that Le Roux was part of the TrueCrypt collective, but couldn't prove it. Le Roux clapped back in what would be his last message board post on the alt.security.scramdisk forum. In fact, even today, the question of who exactly launched TrueCrypt remains unanswered, and as we'll explore in part 5, this is a very interesting aspect of this story. After Le Roux's departure from the encryption world, at least under his own name, he entered the internet pharmacy business. What Le Roux did next was to combine two of America's favourite pastimes, popping pills and online shopping, and the results were phenomenal.
From the start, the call centre online prescription business was incredibly lucrative.
He probably made $300 million in sales in 4 years. For a startup, that is phenomenal.
In 2007, Le Roux moved his family to Manila, where he would base his operations. He also had call centres in places like Israel, and this was a brilliant move by Le Roux.
He moved to Manila, set up some call centers there and in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Now this was brilliant because nobody's looking for organized crime in these places. They're looking in Colombia, they're looking elsewhere, but they're not looking for a big operation which Paul created to sell high volume prescriptions.
Le Roux was moving some serious volume during this time.
Every day, thousands of prescriptions would be processed through the call centres in Manila, and the drugs dispatched by courier service across the United States.
He was one of FedEx's biggest customers.
A relative of Le Roux pointed to around 2008-2009 as the point at which Le Roux snapped. "I think the money got to him. I personally saw $100 million in his office in Makati. Cash bud. It was fucking ridiculous. It was in wicker baskets lined up on the side of the wall in his office." Le Roux's appetite only grew, and not just in the literal sense.
For years, Paul Le Roux's real identity remained hidden. He was whispered about in the Filipino underworld only as the Fat Man.
He didn't care about food. He ate Domino's, he ate McDonald's, but he kept 2 cooks there 24/7.
He now wanted to be a different kind of businessman, a lord of the real underworld and not just the virtual one. An Israeli associate of Le Roux tells how Le Roux wanted to make more money fast. Le Roux wanted to diversify, to be bigger. The only way to do that was illegal. He was living inside a movie, you could almost say.
I used to watch movies until my life became one. Last night, movie. Yesterday, movie. Last month, movie. This year, movie.
As well as this, Le Roux was notorious for his sexual exploits. He once wrote to his cousin, 15 to 20 a week, sometimes 3 per night. A former call center employee tells of an assignment that Le Roux once gave him. He initially assumed that Le Roux wanted him to collect women in order for Le Roux to open a bar. However, this was not the reason. As Le Roux explained, "I'm going to impregnate them and build an army of kids." Le Roux asked him to make a spreadsheet to track the women, their names, dress size, age, medical checkups. The operation was given top priority by Le Roux, who even sent his emissary to China to try to find women there. It is rumoured that Le Roux has at least 11 children.
Paul Le Roux admits to having 11 children by 7 women. He has boasted that he's the biggest baby daddy in the lockup. That's one of his things that he does. He probably has more.
Le Roux's businesses expanded into logging, precious metals mining, gold smuggling, land deals, cocaine shipping, and arms dealing. These activities were spread across dozens of shell companies registered all over the world. Of course, he needed to launder the money.
Le Roux couldn't risk using normal banks to hide his staggering profits, so he devised a system to transform all that cash into assets that he could hide from official scrutiny. What's going on? For that he needed muscle, so he hired Israeli ex-Special Forces soldiers, men like Doron Shulman. Every week, a group led by Shulman would bring bags of cash from Manila and swap them for gold bars in Hong Kong.
He liked gold. He loved gold. He accumulated it in Hong Kong, among other places. He had a stash of it in a safe house in Hong Kong, what, $40–50 million, something like that worth.
Le Roux had plenty of muscle in the form of ex-soldiers and mercenaries, and they would solve any problems with force if necessary. Le Roux was closest to ex-British soldier Dave Smith, who would act as the leader of the mercenaries and allow Le Roux to insulate himself and not have to deal with people. In fact, Le Roux once told Smith, "I live vicariously through you." However, things took a turn for the worse, at least from Dave Smith's perspective, as Smith stole $5 million worth of gold from Le Roux.
I mean, he hated Dave Smith for that.
Le Roux was enraged. He interviewed people around Dave Smith, and then he called Dave Smith to Le Roux's place in the country. When Dave Smith got there, there was this South African hitman, Marius.
They had David Smith dig a hole. They were saying they were hiding some additional gold and things in this hole. It was a cold and calculated murder. There was no remorse.
Marius shoots at him, and then Le Roux grabs a gun, and he fires into the corpse.
Le Roux then set about building an arms base in Somalia.
Somalia is just the Wild West. I can buy a stretch of land. I can be a warlord. I can do what I want there. And I can use that as a place to ship guns from. And he said, what we're going to do is we're going to build on the coast, we're going to build a big camp. I call it Amazon for arms.
To achieve this, Le Roux called upon an ex-soldier from Europe codenamed Jack to work on the ground for him in Somalia. At sea, he had to bribe Somali pirates.
And that's when Le Roux called him the Golden Boy. Then Le Roux wanted the base on the coast built, and he needed to have a landing strip that would accommodate cargo planes, because cargo planes were going to bring in guns. He needed a port to bring in guns and other equipment by sea. In order to do that on the Somali coast, they had to bribe the Somali pirates. He told Jack to go make a deal with the Somali pirates.
It was actually this activity that landed Le Roux on the radar of the DEA, as he popped up in a UN report on security in Somalia.
We had this discussion about who are the big bad guys on the international scene.
At first, the DEA's Special Investigative Unit knew nothing about Le Roux's operations in Asia. It was only when a UN report on security in Somalia highlighted the big boss's activities in guns and drugs there that they decided to dig a little deeper.
We were focused on it from Somalia. We didn't know about the other things he really had going at that point.
The DEA were now on his tail. Of course, Le Roux's encryption skills came in very handy.
The big boss has used his phenomenal coding skills to cloak all his criminal schemes from outside scrutiny.
He felt completely safe. His computer system was completely encrypted by him. There would have been no email wiretaps or anything like that. You couldn't have broken into it.
The DEA needed somebody on the inside. Le Roux was getting more and more paranoid about people in his organization stealing from him. And without justification, he suspected his so-called golden boy Jack of stealing from him and ordered a hit on Jack.
When Jack is tipped off about the death threat, he leaves a voicemail on a CIA hotline and runs for his life. 18 months later, that message gets passed on to DEA Special Agent Tommy Sindrick.
And I dialed the number. Guy answers the phone. He says, hello. And I said, how you doing? This is Tommy Sindrick. I work for the United States government. You sent some information years ago. Yes. I said, I'd like to talk to you. Are you willing to talk?
This was a huge mistake on Le Roux's part.
Crucially, Jack can offer documentary evidence of his relationship with Le Roux. He even gives the DEA direct access to his secret communications with his boss, ripping away the thick cloak of encryption, which until now has made Le Roux virtually invisible.
One of the things he said is, I saved everything. And we were like, you saved everything? And he goes, I have it all on my computer. I'm going to give it to you all. We just hit the treasure trove.
Le Roux then had a change of heart.
Jack tells the DEA that the big boss has contacted him to say he'd been wrong to suspect his golden boy of stealing. He's even apologized for putting a contract on Jack's life. So the DEA asked Jack to go back to work for Le Roux.
The DEA now needed to devise a sting operation. They knew via their interactions with Jack that Le Roux wanted novelty and excitement. So who better than the Colombian cartel?
The next part of the sting has Jack tell Le Roux he has made contact with a major Colombian drug trafficker, offering the big boss an irresistible new transnational hookup.
Le Roux then incriminated himself further.
He thought Jack was working with the Colombians, and they were looking to bypass the Mexicans in the United States and start creating their own meth. So we got the recipe for meth. And we added some other chemicals, but we basically sent the recipe for meth plus a few other chemicals. And Le Roux immediately goes, I know what they want. They want meth. And I took a huge sigh of relief because we were like, got him.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Because if he's willing to say meth in an email, that means he's going to deal openly. Because evidence requires knowledge. You have to have him knowing what he's doing it for, and how he's doing it.
The DEA now needed to lure Le Roux out of Manila, as his network of corrupt officials in Manila would ensure that he would never get arrested.
Jack sends a message that the Colombian drug trafficker is willing to talk business, but only if the big boss agrees to meet face-to-face in a third country, Liberia in West Africa. That's because the DEA knows someone there they can trust. Fomba Sirleaf, son of a former president of Liberia and head of his country's national security agency, has worked closely with the DEA in the past and shares their determination to stop narco-traffickers in their tracks.
But we have to do the arrest since it's on our home soil. That's the law.
So he's inside the hotel now?
Yeah.
We got two very large Liberian police officers who Fomba Sirleaf had given us to be the ones to make the arrest. And I mean very large guys. They were big, tall, broad, very intimidating.
Le Roux is a big guy, so arresting him was far from trivial.
We make entry, they bang on the door.
Le Roux has been tricked so well into dropping his guard that he's even brought his girlfriend along for the trip.
Cindy Cayenne, Paul's girlfriend, answers the door. The cops go, you're under arrest. The two cops go for Le Roux. So as the Liberians start to go, you're under arrest, and they try to cuff him. Paul goes into immediate passive resistance. The Liberians are standing there. I'm getting ready to throw a punch and punch him, and then the next thing you hear is the Liberian police officer goes, "Sir, stop resisting or I'm going to shoot you."
As soon as Le Roux was arrested, he tried to bribe the police officers who arrested him.
Paul's under arrest, and Paul immediately starts to try and bribe the African cops. He says, "My African brother, what can we do to work this out?" And they're like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "No, we're African brothers here."
What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
If you can call me a lawyer to stall these DEA guys, I will make you a very rich man. Very rich, beyond your wildest dreams. I think the first thing you offered him was $300,000, then he pushed it up to $500,000, and then he told the guy to name his number.
When he realised he wasn't getting out of this one, he started to physically struggle, and it took a lot of police officers to get him on the plane. He was a big unit after all.
There's about 10 of us trying to do this. We ultimately get him shackled. We have to carry him down 3 flights of stairs.
How do you pick up a guy like that and put him in a vehicle?
And we finally get to the plane, and we get him on the plane. And we were like, thank God. And it was a complete relief to get him settled on that plane.
When he was on the plane, something switched in Le Roux, and he went back into boss mode. He started to negotiate with the DEA agents, talking about nation states like Iran and North Korea.
The first thing he says to us is, "Well played, gentlemen, well played." And he goes, "Obviously, if you're looking at me, you're looking at much bigger things." We look at each other, Eric responds, "No, Paul, you're kind of the prize." He goes, "No, gentlemen." And we're like, "What's bigger than you?" He goes, "Nation states, gentlemen, nation states." And that's when he starts going into North Korea and Iran.
Le Roux had more than just the bargaining chip of North Korean meth or Iranian arms. He also had the ability to capture the enforcers who were under his payroll for a long time. And these guys needed to be held accountable for the murders they had committed, and they were very dangerous individuals who the US government and the DEA specifically wanted behind bars. Now, as well as this, a crucial part of this story is the last part, and it's part 5. As we discussed previously, Le Roux is rumoured to be a key member of the TrueCrypt collective. In November 2012, a man with the online handle Cincinnatus decided to throw a party in Hawaii. The idea arose out of an email exchange with Runa Sandvik, a developer and expert on the online software Tor, which allows its users to mask the physical location of their computers on the internet. After she gave a Tor tutorial on Reddit, Cincinnatus sent Sandvik an encrypted message. Cincinnatus told Sandvik that he lived in Hawaii. Sandvik mentioned that she would be there on vacation the following month and could give a talk on Tor. Cincinnatus suggested they host a crypto party, a phenomenon that had arisen around that time among technology and privacy conscious activists. The date was set for December 11th. Unbeknownst to Sandvik, her fellow party planner was hatching a much more elaborate education scheme. 4 days after he contacted Sandvik, Cincinnatus sent an email to the journalist Glenn Greenwald. "The security of people's communications is very important to me," he wrote. In a series of emails, he suggested that Greenwald set up an encrypted means by which sources could contact him. Cincinnatus organised the crypto party at a hackerspace called High Capacity, and when Sandvik arrived, Cincinnatus introduced himself as Ed and told her that he worked at the computer hardware company Dell. Ed kicked off the evening by welcoming the attendees, then invited Sandvik to give her presentation on Tor. When she was finished, Ed pulled out his laptop, plugged it into a projector, and began his own instructional talk about TrueCrypt. In Ed's presentation, Sandvik later wrote, he pointed out that while the only known name associated with TrueCrypt is someone in the Czech Republic, TrueCrypt is one of the best open source solutions available. It later became clear that Ed was actually Edward Snowden, who handed over a trove of documents from the NSA in an effort to blow the whistle on what he believed were egregious privacy encroachments by the US government. TrueCrypt was one of a small number of encryption programs that had withstood the NSA's efforts to crack it. What Snowden and the rest of the world wouldn't know for another 2 years was that Paul Le Roux, the man whose code formed the foundation of TrueCrypt, was at that very moment in the custody of the US government. Le Roux is in a bind, facing the full force of a US federal prosecution for any number of his extraordinary array of crimes. The only way out was to spill his secrets.
They'll flip the switch, say that because of the crisis, because of the dangers that we face in the world, you know, some new and unpredicted threat, we need more authority, we need more power, and there will be nothing the people can do at that point to oppose it, and it'll be turnkey tyranny.